Disclosures for this and all episodes in this series can be found on the podcast series destination page located on education.webmd.com. The following presentation is copyrighted by WebMD Education. No use, broadcast, or recording of this presentation or any part thereof is permitted without the written authorization of WebMD Education.
The following podcast is supported by an independent educational grant from Novo Nordisk.
Hi, my name is Dr. Donna Ryan, and I'm Professor Emerita at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Welcome to this podcast episode, Tips for Weight Loss Maintenance. This is part of a 6-episode podcast series called Finding the Weight Loss Plan for You. Back in this series, I had the pleasure of speaking with a patient, Jeremy, and he talked about how he was able to find a good doctor to help him with weight loss. Today, Jeremy is going to share with us his tips for weight loss and weight loss maintenance. Jeremy, can you start by telling us a little bit about your weight loss journey?
I sure can, and thanks for having me on again, Dr. Ryan. I was overweight as a kid, and I began my weight loss journey at the age of 12, and it hasn't stopped since. I'm 69 now, and I've seen my weight go up and down a lot, no matter what I tried. And now I've started getting other health problems related to my weight. But I haven't given up the fight, and I think I've finally found a path that's right for me.
So, Jeremy, can you share with us some of the things that have worked for you to lose weight?
I can. They were all, unfortunately, temporary, but some of them worked at the time. When I was a kid, my family didn't like to go see doctors. So the first diet I tried was the grapefruit diet, which was really popular then. And then as I got older, I'd put in a lot of effort to lose weight with calorie counting and other methods, but I would gain that back and more. I could be really disciplined. I could eat healthy, bike a lot, and then I could lose maybe 50 pounds. And unfortunately, I wouldn't keep it off. Over the years, I tried every fad diet, meal replacement shakes, exclusion diets like low carb or low fat. And what I discovered is that your body ultimately rejects that. Your body says, all those foods you told me were bad foods, I want them. I don't care if they're bad. And then you gain back weight. Along the way, I saw several doctors, and I did a weight loss plan at a local hospital. I had some doctors tell me, you need to buckle down and lose weight. You're just being lazy. Basically, I could do all the right things that would make me lose weight, but then it would come back. And I always thought it was because I didn't have enough willpower or I wasn't doing enough.
You know, this story is so typical. I've heard it from many patients. They all say, I know how to lose weight. It's the problem of keeping it off. Tell us a little bit more about what's the longest maintenance period that you've had.
When I've tried diets that I could maintain, ones that weren't so extreme, I could keep it off for about a year, that my body would get the better of me, and then after a year, the weight would all come back.
Yes, that is very typical. It's because obesity is really a chronic disease, and our bodies fight to defend that highest fat mass. But let's move on. What kind of complications have you had because of obesity, and when did they start?
Well, I didn't really have any major physical problems until a few years ago. I was still able to exercise, and I always thought of myself as being the healthiest fat person that I knew. But then I began to develop diabetes, which was definitely an issue that I had to manage and took a lot of work to get under control. I also got atrial fibrillation and another problem, ventricular tachycardia, that I was just in the hospital for.
Obesity is a big driver of risk for type 2 diabetes. And we're now learning that not only does that diabetes increase the risk for heart disease, but obesity itself is an independent driver of heart disease. And the fat around the heart can predispose to heart arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia, both of which you had. And before we move on, I just want to bring up one other thing. And obesity is associated with mental problems too, and obesity stigma is a big problem.
Yes, it definitely is. I always had friends who saw me for who I was and not for my weight. And I had girlfriends. I wasn't always fat all the time. So it wasn't like I was socially completely isolated, but I would notice it with strangers. I'd notice it at work, walking down the street. I always felt that I just wasn't very presentable to the world and that I didn't fit into a thin world where the ideal body is toned and muscular and not too heavy.
Let's talk a little bit about that relationship between obesity and diabetes. We know from research that this obesity diabetes link is very, very tight, and weight loss is associated with improvement in diabetes.
Yes, when I first started treatment with my first endocrinologist, I was told you could even reverse your diabetes if you lost enough weight, but there wasn't any real focus on how to do that. They also asked me to keep a food diary, which I found was just something that I could be disciplined about for 6 months, and then I got completely tired of having to write it all down.
You are not alone. A lot of people hate the food diary.
Well, when I saw my current nutritionist, they told me I only needed to keep the food diary for a week so they could see what I was eating and advise me. And I found that a whole lot more acceptable. And in doing that, I learned things like I don't snack enough and I should have some yogurt and berries in the middle of the morning. And by doing that, it actually stabilized my blood sugar, because who would think that eating more is the secret to stabilizing diabetes and losing weight? But sometimes it really is.
Absolutely, Jeremy. Can you take us through a typical day? What are some of the things that have helped you be more careful or mindful about the food you eat? And what about portion control?
I think a lot of it is good habits because I tend to eat the same things all the time. So I try and make sure that we have the right things in the fridge. I try to eat not in a haze, be aware of what I'm eating, and also eat more slowly. My wife is a little overweight, not as much as me, and she's very supportive about eating the right quantities and the right things. So we've started eating just half of what we used to eat. With the medicine, I tend to feel full faster. It's still a constant struggle, though. I've definitely learned to be more consistent in what I'm having each day. Every meal, I try and include a fat and a protein and a carbohydrate, and not just one of those, and learn about which ones are best for me, as opposed to the ones with too high of a glycemic load or that just aren't as nutritious. One of the best mental tricks is I've learned not to call any food a bad food, but instead just say, I can eat things I like as long as I eat them in the right balance and in moderation. It's not good to just have a candy bar for sure, but I can have something that's sweet along with protein and fat and a salad, and that combination makes it work. Also, time of day is important. It's much better to be able to eat a larger meal earlier in the day. And we used to have our dinners around 8 or 9 at night, but now we're doing it around 6. And I find that really is very helpful. So we're not just getting full and then going to bed.
So, what I'm hearing is that it's important to enjoy the food you eat, but you have to be mindful about the quality and the quantity. You want to eat more foods that are nutritious throughout the day than the ones that are not. Jeremy, what about physical activity and exercise? Is this a part of your regimen?
Because of my hip replacement and my weight, it's hard for me to do a lot of walking, but I do try to walk some, go to the store and walk around when we're shopping. Luckily, we have a backyard pool, and during pool season, we tend to swim every day. Also, before I went to the hospital recently, I'd been going to physical therapy whenever insurance would let me. That was really good for keeping my tone up, stretching, doing steps so that I wasn't losing all my muscle tone. I also went to cardiac rehab a couple of times where I did some resistance and aerobic exercises. And I can highly recommend it because they're very knowledgeable there and they monitor you to make sure that your heart is happy while you're doing all that activity. Even if it doesn't seem like I'm doing that much, It really does keep my muscle tone up. And now I feel much better, and it's an awful lot better than just lying in bed.
That's wonderful. Physical activity is so important, especially around maintenance of weight loss. And being active looks different for different people. You mentioned earlier that you were taking a medication. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I started seeing a doctor trained in obesity medicine, and she recommended I try a new formulation of an injectable medication that I'd tried before, but this one is really working for me. I just felt like something in my system was fixed. I started feeling full sooner, which I never really did before. You know that feeling you get where your stomach is talking to you and it's saying, I want to eat some of this or more of that? And I feel like that voice is suppressed. Not completely, but I just don't feel as interested in food. It's like my stomach's growling is balanced out with something else.
That's a great way to think about it. What's happening is that medicine is changing the way that your gut hormones control your appetite.
And then I also found that when I was hospitalized and lost a lot of weight, I was able to use much less insulin for my diabetes and still maintain the blood sugar level that I wanted to maintain.
Yes, that relationship with weight and diabetes is so tight. So even though you're still at a weight that's considered medically obesity, would you say that you feel healthier?
Absolutely. I feel healthier, and even a relatively small amount of weight loss seems to have produced dramatic results. It feels really good to see my numbers getting lower.
Jeremy, that's wonderful. And that is actually the goal. It's really not about how you look, it's about getting you to a healthier place than when you started. Some people can get there with diet and exercise, but they are the minority. Many people need medication or even surgery. In fact, the medicines that are currently FDA approved can be taken long term to help with weight loss and maintenance. Most of these drugs work best with a reduced calorie diet and increased physical activity. And by increased physical activity, we would really like to see you work up to at least 225 to 300 minutes a week of moderately intense physical activity, intense enough to make you sweat. These medicines are really like medicines we take for other conditions like blood pressure, and we want you to take them for the long term. So when you stop your blood pressure medicine, what happens to your blood pressure? It goes up, right? Same thing with these. When we stop taking these medicines that work to help our appetite, we'll see weight drift up again. And that's why these medicines are indicated for weight management. They're indicated for long-term use. Now, moving on. Jeremy, a lot of people get help from support groups or social forums online. Have you ever joined any of those? And what do you think of those?
I've tried going to several different support groups in person and signing up for some online. And in the best case, I found it to be positive and inspirational. I learned some good tips from other people going through the same thing, but other times it could be depressing. It was particularly hard hearing other people's success stories, seeing that they could lose something like 70 pounds and keep it off, but I couldn't do it when I was on a similar treatment plan. I think some people benefit more than I do from the social component of meeting other people. But frankly, I prefer more of a one-on-one relationship with somebody who can be helpful.
Yeah, everybody's journey is different. And I think it's important that we individualize the treatment plans. Jeremy, we have just a few minutes left. The holidays are around the corner. And that's a wonderful but tricky time for some people with all the delicious food and temptations around. What's your plan to stick to your weight loss plan?
Well, luckily, it's just going to be me and my wife. Typically, we go to the supermarket and pick up some prepared holiday foods. But since we're eating so much less now, we're going to be very careful not to get too many of those and just have small portions rather than eating until we get into a food coma. So I'm looking forward to lots of delicious meals with leftovers, but none of them too big.
Sounds great. Okay, it's time for us to wrap up. Jeremy, any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
I think one of the main things I learned from my life experience is that my system is not normal compared to people who maintain a normal thin weight. It may be genetics, it may be something else, but there's a lot of things that aren't wired right. So anything I can do to help rewire my system and get around those problems with having a healthier diet, using medication, doing exercise when I can, all those things are useful.
Well, Jeremy, that's a wrap. Thank you for another insightful discussion today. And to our listeners, I just want to say thank you for joining us in this podcast series. We hope you learned from our experts in obesity medicine and got some useful tips from our patient interviews. There's a lot of good information covered in these 6 episodes, so I encourage you to go back and listen again if you want to understand something better. Remember, obesity and being overweight is caused by many factors. It's a complex chronic disease, and it's not your fault. Thank you for listening.